Okay, so welcome. As you would have seen in the title, this day is about 2 years late, almost exactly 2 years late. So, a super quick history on why it's 2 years late. November 2020, I believe it was Black Friday. Whenever I think that's the middle of November or something. Driftworks in England had their Black Friday sales on, and that's when I decided to pull the trigger and buy the Airlift setup. So bought that in November 2020. It didn't arrive till I think a week or two before Christmas, something like that. So if you've seen any of the really early videos of this, that would have been December, January, February 2020 of when I was first putting this in, and all of that, digging around, and is what led to the full restoration, essentially, of which has taken about 2 years. Well, there was, without going into too much detail, there was about a year or so wasted on waiting on people who said they'd do the work, and but blah blah blah. You might have heard all the story already. So anyway, we're finally back at it. The car has been what we call NCT'd here, like the equivalent of an inspection or an MOT. You've heard me talk about it before. So the car is now fully legal to drive on the road, taxed, insured, tested, everything. Because this car is over 30 years old, I get 2 years NCT on it, whereas it's supposed to be only one. So I can safely put the air suspension in now for until August of 24. When that date comes around, I can just pull the struts out, the air shocks out, and put in normal. So it's not going to be a big deal. So with all that in mind, we have all this stuff ready to go. So quick talk through everything that's in it. These are the rear air struts, air shocks. I keep saying struts. I'm watching too many American YouTube channels. Fronts, same as EGs, EG Civics, EKs, DC Integras, Gel Sol, stuff like that. I think maybe even Preludes as well. I'm not entirely sure. Pretty much anything with the fork type front shocks. Your shock fork sits onto the end of the shock there. So what I had done before, as I'd seen, or as you might have seen in older videos, I had taken the top mounts off my old Chinesey coilovers and was going to use those. But then it occurred to me the actual factory, well, these aren't OE ones, but they're replacements. Factory shock mount is actually significantly smaller. So whereas if I was going to be using these, that's where the body of the car would sit. So there's, I didn't even measure that, but that's a good 2 inches anyway, I'd say, easily. Whereas if I'm using the factory ones, it sits on top of that. So this is kind of hard to make out with the camera, especially to show you with one hand, but that's at least an inch to inch and a half, like shorter, the distance from there to there, meaning therefore the car will go that much lower and be that much lower. So the ones of these that were in the car that are on the shocks now, that are in those guys, they're not knackered, but they are quite a few years old. So what I'm going to do is, these are all brand new. It has obviously the rubber mount, it has the bushings for in between, that go in there. So the plan is to pull those off, put those back on the coilovers, get rid of the coilovers, put these on, new bushings and hardware and stuff like that. Same for the rear, exact same issue there. Again, you will see where it would sit, again, that's where the body of the car would be, but using the normal, the OE style, it's about that inch and a half or so shorter. New hardware and stuff there as well. I also have some leader lines from OCD for the front. It will include a couple of new upper control arms. There'll have to be a little bit of modification of those. I'll go through all that in a minute. So yeah, it's an exciting day. 2 years late, but here we go. No time to fuck around, so let's go. That's one air shock put together. Straightforward, same as replacing a top mount on any shock, really. Very straightforward. So it's nice to know that's all brand new. What I need to do now is, where is it? Right, that's where you would have seen I have the old airline fittings taped up there, but I'm going to do a leader line instead. So there's no actual, like the nylon plastic line exposed near the wheel or whatever. Do you know, anyone that's done this before, you know what I'm talking about. But what I do need to do is figure out the orientation of that versus the travel of the control arm, because in the Airlift instructions, because again it's generic to most of the 90s Hondas, they tell you just drill a hole in the shock tower and run your lines underneath the car, but I've done it differently. So what I want to do is figure out the orientation of that, as I said, versus the travel of the upper control arm, and see where I need to, as you have to notch a little bit out of there for the fitting. I don't think it'll be much, like literally maybe just round it off a little bit. Might double check the instructions, but that's what we're going to do now anyway, figure out what way that needs to point. Okay, so shock's offered up. I haven't looked at this, so I don't know how high up or how low it's going to sit or whatever. I've literally just been looking the other way as I jacked the wheel up to see how to check the travel. So we're going to find out together how high up it goes and or how low the car will be, if that makes sense. So let's have a look. Holy shit! Fucking hell. Like, look at that in comparison. Like, there's the bottom of the car and there's the wheel. Oh, that's so cool. So all the way, I know it will travel all the way up. We're right up against the body there now. So as you can see, the fitting, it's kind of hard to show. Yeah, fitting is right there. So the only place I have for the fitting to come out is, see if I can do this with the light, is just about here. So I'm going to have to angle that, you know, twist the shock that way a bit, like anti-clockwise, and then cable tie on the leader line, drill a little hole there, cable tie it on there, and then it can come up here and go through the body like it did before when it was the rubber lines or nylon lines, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it's not too big of a deal, not much to have regarding travel. I also did read and see online that you are supposed to have to trim the edges off the control arms. No, I'm not using these control arms, I have a brand new set to go in it. You're supposed to kind of take 3 to 5 millimeters off the edge of that all the way down so the bag doesn't rub off it when it's fully compressed. But I mean, it's fully compressed there. I know this is hard to show you now, like it's nowhere near rubbing off anything. There's like, you know, between the bolt and the bag there's like a finger's width. Same over there if you can make it out. If I remember, like the nearly 2 years ago when I was doing this, when the bag was fully inflated, it was nowhere near touching it either, but obviously because it was bigger, it was that little bit closer. So for now I'm not going to trim anything, and then when the car is actually, when all of this is in and working and I can actually physically put it on the ground and check it, if I have to lift it up again, excuse me, and pull out those arms and just trim a couple of millimeters off them, that's not a big deal. But for now, so let's pull that shock back out, figure out exactly where we need to orient it, put in the leader line, put it back in the car and see how it looks. Right, we've figured all that out. I'm very pleased. Again, I'm sorry now that it's kind of hard to show you all of this because we're working in a pretty confined space, but you can see the fitting is oriented right there. The control arm is, you know, compressed all the way, like the height of its travel, and I have loads of room, loads and loads of room. I know I'm kind of essentially, I'm kind of showing you nothing really, like, but you can make it out there. Like, I have a lot of room there, I have a lot of room over here, like there's loads and loads of room there. So what I think I'm going to do, if I can show you this, I think up here, yeah, I think up here I'm going to drill a little hole in the shock tower and get one of those cable ties, you know, that has a clip on it, and cable tie that up there as high as it'll go really, because it's not putting any, you know, really undue pressure or anything on the leader line. And then that's the oh, that's blinding everyone. Right there is the line. There's just a hole in the body there for whatever reason. That's where I had put the rubber line through before, so I'm going to put that through there. Right in here I have an opposing hole drilled when I take this down out of the way. I am thinking of maybe trying to go from this side. I don't know if I'll be able to get in there with a drill or not. It's very, very tight to have it go straight in instead of down and around, but either way I think we'll be fine. So I'm going to pull that back out. I do have to notch the top mount, the littlest bit. You can see it's just about sitting on the fitting there, and I don't want it again to have any undue pressure on it. So whip that out, trim that, finalize all of that stuff, run that line, and that'll be that side done then. I think it's pretty exciting. It's straightforward really, just like anything, figuring out where everything fits, you know. Okay, now you're gonna have to try and kind of bear with me here while I show you all this stuff. So that's what I was talking about, trying to get the cable tie there up out of the way of the shock tower. Works fine, or out of the way of the control arm, I mean. I didn't end up having to notch the, yeah, it's very blurry. Didn't end up having to notch the, excuse me, the top mount. I just turned the fitting another couple of degrees and the flat spot met the flat spot. There's a fanny hair in it, but it doesn't touch, so if it doesn't touch, it doesn't touch, that's fine. Comes along there. The control arm in all its travel, as you've seen, just barely misses that, so I think it'll be fine. Comes along there. I wasn't able to get in that other side where I was talking about, up through there. I've put some loom cover stuff on it. It won't last forever, but periodic checking it, it'll be fine. Out here, come along here, and I've trimmed it down and met the fitting right there where the line comes out through the body. So the reason, like, you don't have to run leader lines. I don't know why people really go for those. I guess because they're braided, you know, exposed to the elements or whatever. But because I went with the 3/8 line, which is the thicker line there, yeah, it's way harder to work with and a bit harder to manipulate, but it's way tougher. But either way, that'll be a lot, like the wheel isn't going to rub off that or none of that stuff, so I think I'll be okay. But it also means that if anything ever goes wrong with the leader line, I only have to replace from there all the way over here, as opposed to having to replace potentially the entire line, you know, because that runs literally from right there all the way through, as you might have seen before, the inside of the car and out into the boot. So that should be straightforward enough. That side is fine as well, or that side is done. I mean, the other side ever so slightly different, and I think I know why, but the other side is there, runs out same way. It turns out actually where I drilled the hole for the clip there is double skinned, so it was a little bit awkward. I didn't realise, but either way it's in and it's fine. Up through there, and instead of coming back out here, I came out up there and then down and into the fitting. And if I remember right, I'm pretty sure, like my original plan, I think that's a factory hole, if I remember right. I'm not certain off the top of my head, but either way I'm going to put a grommet in it now. I drilled that hole, if I remember right, and I drilled that one with the intention of coming straight through like that, because it was quite difficult on the other side to get the line in there and fish it out through here again. So if I remember right, because this, you have to remember, this is 2 years ago, if not a bit more, that I was initially pricking around with this. There was a nut up there somewhere for the wing that I couldn't get at, or it was rounded off, I can't remember, on the other side, whereas I was able to get this side off, which made it easier to drill that hole. Now at some point, I'm sure down the line, I'll end up taking the wing off the other side there, so I might do it the same way then. But either way, there's no discernible difference in it really. But again, same reasoning behind it anyway. So that's the front done. I'm not going to, obviously I'm not dressing everything up and, you know, tightening everything and putting the arch liner back and stuff like that. I'll wait till all of it's all tested and stuff like that. Excuse me, but for now we'll, oh yeah, it is a bit annoying. I know this is kind of difficult to see, but there is no provision on the air shocks, unfortunately, for those two clips for the brake lines. See this guy here, and there's another one back there, which is a bit of a pain. I guess I'll just cable tie them onto the shock. It's not that big of a deal. Or I could cut there is a provision on the coilovers, which I could just cut off and weld onto a tiny little spot weld. I don't think it'd have any adverse effect on the shock, but for now, not too concerned about that kind of thing. Let's move on to the back. Okay, so the rear's done as well. Very, very straightforward. There's a difference in length. The shaft is longer, she said, in the factory shocks than the shaft inside the bag. So it didn't actually allow, there wasn't enough length or thread or anything like that to use the factory replacement mounts that I got. It's not a big deal. It would have been nice to use them, as I saw, or as I showed you, the difference in height, like where it would, the factory one would sit on that, whereas here we have the, you know, it's about an inch, maybe 30 mil or so, I don't know. But either way, it's in it anyway, and even excuse me, as you might have seen before in an old video, from when I tested all this the first time, it came down more than enough at the back. It wasn't an issue at all. So that's all back in. It's all nice and tight down there. I forgot I had to use a couple of spacers. You can see the few washers there either side of that, again, because these shocks fit a whole bunch of the 90s Hondas, but again, it's not a big problem. So what's going to happen next, I'm going to take the fitting, or sorry, the line from the fitting, goes into the grommet here. That comes out, where is it? Right there on the body. You can see the grommet there. And then do the same the other side. Everything is all tightened up. It was way easier to put in the back. Obviously, because I ended up just reusing them essentially as they are. I did have to reseal one fitting with a bit of that thread locker stuff. It's that one there. You can see the white little spooge on it. So yeah, run the lines into the back. Spanner, just spanner check everything, make sure that everything underneath there associated with just the normal suspension stuff is tight, because when I drove it one day last week, felt it was a little kind of a knock or something like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if I've left something just, you know, a little bit more than hand tight, or maybe stuff has come a little bit loose. So double check all that stuff. Excuse me. I'm very happy with how the front came out. So yeah, run the lines in there, and I think that's going to be it. And there we have it. Lines ran for the back in through the grommet. They will go up into the boot build and the manifold and stuff from there. You might remember from another video. See the other one coming through the other side. Nice and tidy from the back. Nothing too crazy. I will trim that line. You know, you're not supposed to, you know, reuse it in the same exact place. You're supposed to take a couple of mil off it. But that'll all be done while I'm testing. So that's officially all four corners on bags. I guess you could officially say the car is bagged, just without all the management and the tank and all that stuff fitted. So that'll be the next step. All four corners, lines ran. Everything I think is tight. I guess I'll find out when I go to put in the tank and air up and down and stuff for the first time. I don't know if you're supposed to test something like this on, when it's up on stands or whatever. Probably not, because when you calibrate it, it asks you about if it's on level ground and blah blah blah, stuff like that. But we'll see. I might put blocks under the wheels or something, but we'll see what happens. So that's that. All four corners done. So next step then is to start fitting this lovely thing and the tank and the compressor, but that'll be next time. So we'll see you again for part 2.